Welcome today. Hi, I'm Rupert, and I'm joined today by Ben, our consulting director at Information XP, and we are SharePoint specialists. Now, today we're going to explore the designing of SharePoint team sites for, well, how work actually happens rather than how Microsoft presents it to you in the default templates. So let me give you a bit more background. So before you go any further, it's probably worth just pausing for a moment to check we're all in the right place. So over and over again, I hear from organizations, look, we're using SharePoint, but our end users have a lack of confidence in it. Um, we're going to need some more training because we've tried training and it's not worked. And they're not saying they picked the wrong technology, but they're not getting the best out of it. And people are still using email, they're still using their desktop to share files. And where they are using SharePoint, well, it's turning into a bit of a mess when it comes to file management, but it's probably got some great site structures in there. So really, if this resonates with you, this is, absolutely the webinar for you. And then given that, Ben, what are people going to walk away with by the end of this session?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rupert. So I think, as we say here, the point is that even though users, even though SharePoint may be set up correctly in terms of the right hubs and site structure, the challenge is users are still struggling. They are still struggling to find things. They are getting search results that aren't particularly effective. And we're going to see how the way that we design our libraries can actually influence and improve some of those behaviors. And what we want to leave you with is a sort of simple model that you can easily take away and use as a starting point for your SharePoint team sites moving forward.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's dive in. So interestingly, I hear the same questions and points over and over again, which is we want to do things properly. And they're not questions around how do I get this latest feature working? Sometimes you get things about permissions, less so about configuration. It's more about I'm not sure where to save something. I'm not sure when I found something, is this the right version or the final version? And then that lack of confidence also means I'm not sure what we can delete. So we end up keeping everything, Ben. So what's actually going on here?
Yeah, so I mean, this is often the point when people think that, they might have an issue with training within the organization, or the other thing which I hear all the time is people saying we need a consistent file naming convention because that is going to help us be more effective. I think the thing is, what organizations don't realize, it's not necessarily that SharePoint, is broken or isn't broken. The thing is, SharePoint is neutral. It is sort of standardized and simplistic. It gives you tools, it gives you containers, but it doesn't really tell you how you should use them or how you should work. So what that means is it's every time someone needs to save a document, they're having to think, where do they need to put it? Is it safe to delete it? Is it a working document? Is it finalized? How do I go and find it at a later date? And if I put it here, is anyone who shouldn't have access to it going to be able to see it? So the problem is when the system doesn't answer these questions, they do the safest thing they can. They copy it, they save it locally, they sort of keep everything as opposed to tidying anything up.
So, Ben, what I'm hearing is this doesn't stem from a training problem per se, but it's more about lack of intentional design. I'm not getting the signposts I need.
Yeah, exactly. I think once people see that, the conversation changes a bit. So, it goes away from how do we get users to sort of behave and do, and follow these kind of rules, and more about does the system guide them to do what it is that they need to do from an information management perspective.
Okay, so if we take a step back from technology and let's think a little bit about how work actually happens, do you want to just take me through this, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've got this sort of fairly simplistic model, if you will, and we've worked with many organizations over the years, and what we see everywhere is this sort of fairly standardized approach in terms of how we work and how we share information. So the first thing is that we have documents that we are working on. They are either transient or they are regularly kept up to, they're regularly updated. So one of the things that stands to mind is things like those Excel sheets that are used to track the current status. It might be a sales tracker, a HR tracker, those types of things that they're just updated all the time. We then have documents that we are filing. We need to keep them because there's some form of obligation. They are contracts. There's a regulation around it, and if we lost them, we could be in trouble, or the business could be exposed in some way.
Got you.
We then have information that is useful sort of knowledge, our reference material. It could be things like user guides, it could be standard operating procedures that we need to refer to, it could be case studies of useful examples of things. They don't necessarily change that often. They're not active working documents, but they don't have the same kind of legal obligation tied to them, and we still look at them quite frequently. And then the fourth thing is that we are regularly preparing and issuing reports to our, perhaps our senior leadership team. Perhaps you're in a function that is a service function that has to provide analysis and share reports to others on a regular basis. And traditionally, the way that was done is that people will create attachments and send them to email via some form of distribution list.
Okay, and I think when I look at the information I work with on a day-to-day basis, I can already see how it falls into one of these categories. Whether we're organizing, our knowledge sharing session, that fits in working. Where I've got a contract from a client, filing. Our service definitions of what we offer fits in reference and continues. So it kind of makes sense already, and I can apply this both in sort of my sales mindset, but also in HR view as well. And so that's really making sense to me already.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Ben, it's probably worth just seeing what comes out the box with SharePoint and why this causes so much confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go and take a look at an out-of-the-box team site.
Okay, so I'm in SharePoint, I'm in our demo environment here, and actually I'm just going to go to the home page here. Right.
Yeah, so this is effectively what we see when we get a new team site out of the box. I think the only thing that is semi-customized here at the moment is the fact that there's some branding applied because it's attached to one of our hubs. But other than that, this is pretty vanilla. And I think the first thing I would say is that this is just not an effective homepage experience. There's nothing really here that is useful to me when I hit the homepage. If I think about what a team site is, it's a space where a team comes together and they work and they collaborate, and they might need to store documents. And one of the things that is less likely to be required in that space is a news feed. News is for publishing, and that is more appropriate in an intranet scenario than it is in an internal team. And for it to take up such a prominent position is probably a bit unnecessary. Also, that activity feed isn't particularly useful. And the one thing I probably am interested in, which is the documents, is sort of squeezed over on the right hand side in this very difficult to read, and also has some kind of user behaviors which I'm not going to go into now by it being on the home page like that. So that's the first point. The home page is not useful. The next thing is if we go into our documents library, I might just add also the navigation isn't particularly useful or effective either as it stands by default. So what we're now looking at is something that is, we've kind of mocked this up as what we see fairly commonly. This is a set of folders that are completely inconsistent in their sort of convention. I have a folder based on a year where I might store 2025's documents. I've got an archive folder where all of the old stuff is, and it's just sort of, chucked into that subfolder there. I've got some folders representing maybe the status of documents in a review process. I've got a folder representing types of documents. And then, of course, I've got Dave's folder. I'm sure that many of you have seen this, which is where perhaps a new person has taken over the sales team and they don't understand the existing filing structure because it's a mess. So they just create their new version of it, call it Dave's folder or whatever appropriate name, and then they organize everything in there because at least they know how it's structured, right? So this is just something that we encounter all the time when we're working with our clients.
So when you're confused, you basically create your own solution as what's happened here. I'm seeing that 2025. What can we keep and what can we delete? We don't know. It's all in the bucket because no one else knows either. I think that's where it's at. So look, I'm sure many people recognize this, particularly if you're still on file servers, but also now on SharePoint, because that will be mirrored across. So if this is not what we want, Ben, is it then worth looking at how we start bringing intentional design into SharePoint?
Yeah, exactly. So the point that we're then saying here is that, and this is it's a really simple concept. What we're basically saying is those four working scenarios that we have within our teams, let's create libraries for them. Okay, so let's create libraries in SharePoint that match the behaviors of how we work, so that we can create that separation and get value from each of them. So what we can see in this case is working is going to become the working documents area. Filing for our sales scenario that we're going to show you is our sales records, storing all of our client related documents, contracts, etc. We've got a sales reference area, and then we'll have a sales reporting. One thing is just worth highlighting here is that two of these we highlight as core. The working documents and the filing we highlight as really core, and that aligns to the collaboration and filing scenarios from some of our other webinars that we've done. The sales reference, the reference and the reporting is optional. It's an extra step, but it can add quite a lot of value. So it is optional, but we see it as being quite a useful additional capability.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, you probably see the reference actually more than the reporting.
In some
Because
cases.
so many different teams, have that reference material, whether you're on a collaboration site with a part of HR which worries about benefits, you get all that information from your benefits providers about this is the marketing material to share to your employees. Perfect example. Okay, but and I can also see that we've got sales here. You could simply put HR in front of this, and rather than sales records, employee records.
Exactly.
And rather than sales reference, you'd maybe have your job descriptions in there. So this all makes sense to me. Now, what I'd like to see is what does that look like in SharePoint, and how different that is from what we showed just a second ago.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go and take a look.
Okay, here we are.
So what we've done is, again, just sort of mock up what we see as a slightly more effective homepage experience for our new sales and commercial operations team site. So we've removed any of the things that are unnecessary, and we've added in things that are useful. So on our right-hand side, we've got links to the tools that we use, Dynamics, DocuSign, maybe company lookups for sort of, legal information, etc. We also recognize that there will be documents within this site that are particularly relevant to the individuals, and we're using the favorite feature that you can use within a SharePoint library, and we're surfacing those favorited documents through, so I can then, as an individual, pick and choose the things I'm going to use more frequently. And then what I'm doing is showcasing the key libraries, the working documents and the sales records, and then just promoting some activity of what is happening within those other two areas. So the reference material, for example, that is ordered by the content that people are frequently accessing. So the most popular content will rise to the top because that could be useful to someone else. And then any new reports will come through in that feed there. But really the key thing is that we have that structured navigation experience that is going to take us through those four key libraries. So let's start with the working documents area first of all. So out of all of these, this is the area that can probably get away with being the messiest, the least structured. And if anything, I would say the folders that we're looking at here are less organized about document types and more organized about the types of activities that our team carries out. So within our team, we'll have sales planning and campaigns that we're preparing. We might work on and figure out new pricing models. We might prepare new pitches for new products that we're starting to work on, for instance, and it's very collaborative in nature. And in fact, if we take that a step further, Rupert, do you mind just jumping over into the Teams view here?
Okay.
What we're actually going to see is that our sales and commercial operations Microsoft team that we have has the same channels as per the folders that we've got. So what we're saying is, Teams is the space to collaborate. You can have your planners, you can share, you can converse, you can run meetings, and of course you can store files in that context. And so what Teams is great at is collaboration, but what it's not very good at is filing or any of these other things. So our working documents area is the space that is tightly connected with our corresponding Microsoft team. If we jump back to the SharePoint site, and we could do a whole webinar on Teams, we're not going to do that. The rest of the libraries are not related to Teams in any way, just that working documents area. So let's
Interesting.
go to the next one. Oh, sorry, you had a question, go.
No, interesting, Ben. The other thing I noticed is there's no metadata here either, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this kind of analogy that I sort of say, which is the working documents, the kind of stuff on your desk. You know, my desk is messy. I know where everything is because it's on my desk and I use it all the time. And this is kind of the same thing. You're in and out of here all the time. You don't need metadata for these highly collaborative areas because you're using it all the time. Everyone knows where it is. What you need metadata for is the things that you're less likely to look at quite as frequently.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at the next library, which is the sales records library. So this is where we're starting to see some structure come into our library a little bit more. So we've got a new concept that we're going to introduce, which is document sets. Document sets are effectively folders that you can use to organize documents of a similar purpose. In our case, we have a document set for each client that we work with. But over and above a folder, we are able to go and add additional pieces of metadata or tagging that is relevant to that document set as a whole. So we have included the client status. Is it active? Is it an opportunity? Perhaps it's a lost client, for instance. And what that means is we can very quickly and easily filter out the folders that are actually relevant to us to then store all the documents. We have actually chosen to group our client folders by that status, but we could easily choose to group it based on the account owner. So Rupert, if you click on the account owner drop down and go group by account owner, we can just flip that over and say, I can easily see the accounts owned by Rupert and the accounts owned by myself. Okay, so that ability to add metadata to a document set as a whole is really, really useful. We're not trying to replace your CRM system, but it's just a way of easily filtering through into that sort of library structure a bit more easily. Perhaps if you just go into one of yours, Apex Financial Services, I reckon there, Rupert, we go into that
Okay.
one. Okay. So then we're into perhaps a more traditional folder structure within here. So we have documents of different types. You know, we've got those agreement types coming in so we can easily distinguish between the NDAs, the master services agreements, but then we have some folders for the underlying opportunities. So I think one of the things I really want to say here is we do think that folders are appropriate. You know, there are some purists out there that say you should never use folders in SharePoint and you should tag everything. Well, we disagree with that. Folders are appropriate. They're particularly appropriate in working documents, and they are also appropriate when it comes to structure like this, but we can enhance them with some of these additional tags, and we'll explore a little bit more with that in the next part of the demo. Okay.
Okay.
Let's jump over to sales reference. So similarly, you know, we don't have any folder structures here actually, but other than that, similarly, we've got tags to target this content. This is for things like, you know, our service definitions, our case studies in a sales context. It's our useful reference material, our internal knowledge that helps us find and be more effective at what we're doing. We've got some additional columns in here. We could filter by keywords if we wanted to narrow things down. We've got an owner who's responsible for that content. We've got a next review date, because the thing about knowledge often is that it can become stale. So we can then tie in things like notifications to say, when the next review date is due, send a notification to the owner to prompt them to say, is this still valid or relevant? If not, can you, get rid of it? Okay. And then finally, let's go over to the sales reports. So as we'd expect with sales reports, I mean, they could live in filing, but that's not really relevant. This is the space where you're going to store those things that you're going to share to the executive team, for instance. And instead of simply, just taking them and attaching them in an email, you can store and categorize them in here, tag them up based on what year, what quarter they are, and this is where you'll either give your leadership team access to this space, or you will share it directly from this space to those people.
Got you. Okay, Ben. So that sets out the structure, and it really, for me, becomes obvious of where things to go. And I can see how you can replicate this across pretty much every site that we work in from a SharePoint perspective. But as I understand it, that now sets us up for leveraging more of those, features in SharePoint. Initially metadata, which I know you've touched on already, but also things like AI, labels, classification, retention policies, disposition policies. The list goes on. But with all of those, you need to have your data in decent shape first before you even start, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's worth us taking a look at how we can introduce metadata and why it's useful, but how we can actually leverage some of the AI capability to make that process a bit more straightforward nowadays. So yeah, I think we're going to start backwards actually, as you say. So we've got the sales reports already open. The first thing we're looking at, we've already shown you how we're starting to categorize these different types of documents with document types. The key thing is, whenever I talk to anyone about this, they say, oh, if I really got to go and tag all of these documents, that's a big overhead. Are people really going to do it? And what we always try and advocate is anything that can remove the decision away from the user. We have done other webinars where we look at how you can bring in and standardize document templates for documents that you're creating and have the metadata already attached to it. But what we're going to show today is how you can start using the AI capabilities to automatically tag based on what's inside the document.
Right, so I'm going to click on document type, column settings, and edit.
Fantastic. So what we can see here is that we have, first of all, you scroll down to the bottom. This is a choice column in SharePoint. Another type of column we might use is manage metadata, but for simplicity, the choice works really well. So we've got some predefined choices that we want to use and we want to select in this. If you just scroll up a minute though, so what we've now done is say that we want this to autofill that column based on the body of the content. And we can do that by writing a prompt. So within that prompt, we can effectively see that it is instructing it to read the body of the content and choose the most appropriate choice based on the set of values and align it up and match it to our column. Okay. Now I'm not going to go right now and go inside that and validate it, etc. But trust me, it works pretty effectively.
And that's a add-on feature, is that right, Ben?
Yeah, so it's not free. There is a charge to it. It is based on a fraction of a pence, so it's 0.5 cents, 0.5 cents per page per document. So it isn't necessarily something that you just enable everywhere. But it is something that does need a little bit of planning, but it is, it's pretty cost effective, I would say, in terms of the value that it's
Compared to
adding.
humans, I'd say yes. I can agree with that.
Exactly. So the next one we're going to jump to is, I'd probably say let's jump to the sales records library actually.
Okay.
So as you said, with the working documents, we don't have any metadata at all, so we're not going to worry about that. So now if we go into our Apex financial services again, the first thing, can you just scroll over to the right-hand side, please? The first thing is the metadata that we have applied to our document set, the legal name, the client status, the account owner, that has automatically inherited down into all of the documents that sit within inside it. That is an inherent property of document sets and one of their sort of key, sort of powerful capabilities. Okay, so that is a set of metadata that we don't need to tag, and that can be useful for tying into things like automatic document generation and other types of things that you may want to do.
Okay.
The next thing though is we've got some additional columns. Now the first thing that we can see here, of course, is the agreement type. That's the equivalent of the document type. And I'd probably say of all of your columns, a form of document type column, ideally one that you can auto tag like this, is going to be one of the most important columns that you would have out of anything. Okay, so we don't need to look in the prompt. It's very similar to the one that we've shown you already. But we've gone a step further on this. So we've actually started to pull out things like the effective agreement date, the renewal date where appropriate, and we've even gone as far as pulling out whether or not that document is signed or not. So as you can see in here, we've got the, shall we say, the draft versions of those documents, the Word versions that we're going to draw up and might go through a review process internally. And then we've got the signed versions that we've sent through, your favorite e-signature tool of choice. Okay. And so we've loaded up those signed documents in here, or perhaps you could even integrate with it. with DocuSign, for example, and it's flagging that up and showing me the documents that are signed. Why don't we take a look at that prompt, Rupert?
Okay,
So if you click
sign.
on the, go ahead, click on the drop down, column settings, edit. Let's have a look at that prompt. So this is a simple yes, no field in SharePoint, right? It's very, very easy. And what we're saying here is this document, statements of work, I'm not going to read it out line by line, but statements of work will have a signing section where one part of it will be information EXP, the other part will be the client. If this is filled in, the document is signed. If it is not, the document is not signed. Okay. If we really wanted to, we could go and open that up and show you. But yeah, it has effectively been able to pick up on the ones that are the drafts, and the ones that are signed, it's actually detected those and applied it.
I think what's interesting, that is not a technical prompt. We're not asking for regular expressions
Exactly.
or anything clever
That's
like
right.
that. That is,
Yeah.
if you're capable of operating Copilot or ChatGPT, you're 90% of the way there.
Yeah, and realistically, picking up on a signature like that, I can't think of. That is a pretty tough regular expression to write. I'm not even sure it's even possible. So yeah, there's some pretty good AI working there with minimal configuration. The other thing I quite like is our renewal date actually. So Rupert, what I might do is no, we'll do this a bit later. So if we have a quick look at the prompt for the renewal date, the thing I like about this is we know that in our documents, our renewal dates, we don't actually put a renewal date in our documents. We have an effective start date and then a renewal term, which might be 12 months. So what we've done in this prompt is say, take the start date and then add on the renewal term to get the new date. So take whatever the date is now, add on the 12 months, and that gives me my new date. And that's really, really effective for being able to tap into things like when a contract is due for renewal, you might want to notify the account manager to go and pre-warn them to say, yeah, perhaps we're going, go and reach out and start a conversation with them.
Good.
So let's just go into, before we do that, let's just go into our subfolder where we're going to have a statement of work. So we've got a statement of work here. We can see it's pulled out the agreement type. It's not signed. It's got the effective date, the renewal date. Now, Rupert, I understand that customer has actually just signed their contract via DocuSign. So maybe you want to drop that document in.
Beauty of demos that yes, they have.
Yes, they have.
And look, I have dragged this in. That said, we could integrate into DocuSign, Adobe Sign, and this could all be automatic, right?
Yeah.
So, but in this case, I've dragged it from my desktop here just to illustrate the point. And I'm just going to note that already I don't have any metadata here. But you've obviously set that rule, Ben. So I'm going to see if I refresh it, if that's going to, oh, there we go. We do have metadata now.
So that's suddenly populated automatically based on our prompts that we set up. It's pulled out the agreement type, it's pulled out the effective date and the renewal date, and most importantly, it has detected that document has been signed.
And then that could trigger, a message within SharePoint off to maybe a project delivery team. This work's been won now. You now need to get into action and start executing this, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe why don't we just sort of bring this home with that quick last demonstration? So Rupert, if you just go to the root of the sales records library for me, please. So yeah, exactly. So what we have done is create a new view called recent SOWs. So key thing we've done here, we've created a view that completely flattens and hides away all of the folder structure. So you don't have to navigate down in to see it. We've pulled out anything that's tagged as a statement of work and we've ordered it by most recent. We could go a step further and apply a filter on that and say, only show me the ones that are tagged as signed. So I've now got my recent signed statements of work. And exactly as Rupert says, that's something that you could then go and issue to, for instance, a project manager or the delivery team or operations team to say, new order has come in, this has been signed, please start the process.
Perfect. Okay, Ben, does that round us out on the demo?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So putting that in place, I think the first thing that outcome from that really, for me was user confidence. It's now really clear what each library does, what the purpose is. And so I don't need to ask other people. I don't need to second guess. I can guess on and either save what I was looking for, or as we touched on later in here, find what I'm looking for. And therefore, that immediately reduces risk because I'm relying on information maybe in the records area, which I know is factual, or the reference area. And then we talk about improved findability. So whether you have, Copilot or using SharePoint search, yes, you could always find the information, but could you find the right information and the final version of the truth? We've all seen those file names which are underscore final, Ben's version final. So how do we get to a record state? I think which we've shown there. And with that confidence of knowing what's good, we also got that confidence of knowing what we can remove as well. So more recently, we've been here, I hear from clients, we're running out of storage, we don't know what we can delete. What's my choices? And we're saying, well, you start paying to Microsoft, or you start putting a bit more structure, around your information. And so, yeah, something which has come, I say, more recently in the last couple of years as people have started to use up that allowance. And then the final point is you're now ready for governance. So we can start thinking about retention labels, disposition policies, whether we're going to start classification of documents. So you've got all these options open to you and start thinking about what permissions you want to apply. Maybe it's different permissions to different areas. So you have this flexibility, but you've only have that because you put the right things in place from the outset. So Ben, summarizing all of that, what's the key things that you'd like people to remember from today?
Yeah. So, what this isn't rocket science, right? We are just sort of telling people, we're just observing what we see as a standard. And hopefully this is something that is reasonably intuitive for people. But what we're highlighting here is the working area is for stuff that is changing all the time. It's regularly updated. Keep that separate. The reference is for the things that you trust, the knowledge. It doesn't change very often, but you can rely on it being useful because it helps you be more efficient. The records are for proof. If something happens in the future, if there's a dispute, if there's a challenge, you've got this definitive record that you can refer back to, and hopefully not, but potentially stand up in court and be able to use and back you up. And then finally, your reports are for insight. That's the information that you share, that you distribute to people, that they are going to gain. They're going to gain, use out of. And the key thing we're saying is, as I say, it's very simple. Just create different spaces for those things, because it will make each area more effective individually than simply having it all merged together in one big container.
And I think the other aspect of this is by providing this framework, when we're working with larger clients, and clearly we can't go to every team and work out exactly what SharePoint looks like for them. You do need a baseline which says actually this is going to work for 90% of your use cases, and for those final 10%, we'll spend a bit more time, finding out exactly what they need. But it's that balance of we want to roll SharePoint out, we want to give it to everybody, but there's no way that we can spend, you can spend time with 700 people and all their associated teams to work out exactly what they need. So you kind of need this templated, if you like, approach. Is that fair, Ben?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly it, and that kind of really applies. If we start thinking about where we apply this framework, it really comes into place there. I'll just sort of jump into that point. That rollout at scale, that point that you've just said. You can't do a ground up consultative. Well, you can do it, but you're going to blow your budget, and it's going to take you 3-4 years to roll it out. But the reality is people often need to be more effective more quickly than that, and having a standard templated approach that everyone can be trained on the same level as a foundation, and then you can go and look at the sort of point to point areas where they can get additional value off the back of it.
Perfect. Yeah, and the other types of scenarios, people starting from SharePoint from the first time, maybe it's a startup, and they want to get it right from the outset, and it's absolutely the right time to get started. Migrations, whether you're bringing another company into your company from some M&A activity, or you're migrating from a file server, again, it's a great time to structure information because of it. And then that leads us on to the final scenario, which is re-architecture. I think this is really now seeing the light. People have got so far for so long, but now realized the way their data is structured is not working for AI. And because of that, it's now driving the conversation. It's like, well, we can't turn AI on because we haven't got our data in the right order. And that's probably what we're hearing the most right now is like, we've got this imperative to push AI, but we can't do it because we're not confident in the information it's going to return. So that's how we play it. Look, hope this was useful. If you'd like to continue the conversation, do drop into my diary. The easiest way to do that is go to the website and click book a discovery call. That will open my diary and we can find a slot that works for us both. But otherwise, Ben, thank you again for your insight. I know it seems remarkably simple, but I know it's also taken a long time for us to get there based on the projects we've done and the experience we've had. But now we have this framework and it works. I think it's definitely worth sharing.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Rupert.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll wrap this up there.